Welcome back to our channel on this beautiful, crisp morning. Today, we dive deep into the treacherous waters of Genoa City, where dark secrets refuse to stay buried, and the cost of ambition is always paid in human suffering. Prepare yourselves for a heart-wrenching exploration of betrayal, survival, and a mother's absolute worst nightmare unfolding before our very eyes, as the Newman Empire's darkest conspiracy is finally dragged into the unforgiving light of day. The oppressive atmosphere of Genoa City has always been thick with the scent of corporate warfare and generational trauma, but for Sally Spectra, the air has recently become entirely unbreathable. She has been navigating a treacherous labyrinth of emotional and professional landmines, desperately trying to maintain a facade of control while her personal life crumbles around her. Carrying Billy Abbott's unborn child was supposed to be a beacon of hope, a chance for a fresh start after the devastating tragedies of her past. However, the reality of her pregnancy has been overshadowed by Billy's catastrophic psychological downward spiral following the explosive revelation that Jack Abbott, not John, is his biological father. Left entirely isolated by Billy's manic obsession with the Chancellor legacy and his fractured identity, Sally has been forced to carry the immense physical and emotional weight of her high-risk pregnancy completely alone, unaware that a far more sinister storm is gathering just over the horizon. The Spectra Charles launch event was designed to be Sally's ultimate triumph, a glittering testament to her resilience and her ability to rise from the ashes of her forced departure from Newman Media. The ballroom was a sea of flashing cameras, clinking champagne glasses, and the elite power players of Genoa City, all gathered to witness her professional resurrection. Sally stood at the center of the room, radiating a fragile confidence, her hand instinctively resting on her growing abdomen as she projected the image of a woman who had finally conquered her demons. She had sacrificed so much to reach this exact moment, including surrendering her beloved media conglomerate under extreme duress, believing she was making the pragmatic choice to protect her future. But the grand illusion of her success was about to be violently shattered by an arrival that no one, least of all Sally, could have ever anticipated. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom swung open, silencing the ambient chatter of the crowd as Elena stepped into the brilliant glare of the chandeliers. Her sudden, highly public return to Genoa City would have been shocking enough on its own, but it was the small, tightly swaddled bundle cradled protectively in her arms that sent a collective gasp rippling through the room. Elena's expression was an unreadable mask of resolute determination as she navigated through the parting sea of guests, her eyes locked directly on Sally. The air in the room grew inexplicably cold, and the triumphant music seemed to fade into a distant, distorted echo as Sally watched the former medical professional approach the podium. When Elena finally spoke, her voice cutting through the heavy silence like a surgical blade, she announced to the room that she had returned to introduce Adam Newman to his daughter. And then, with a chilling calmness, she revealed the infant's name to the world, Ava. That single three-letter name struck Sally with the devastating force of a physical blow, instantly triggering a catastrophic psychological collapse. The name Ava was not just a word. It was a sacred, agonizing memorial to the daughter she had lost, the child she had mourned in the sterile, heartbreaking confines of a hospital room, while Adam stood helplessly by her side. Hearing that name spoken aloud in a crowded ballroom felt like a violent desecration of her deepest trauma. Sally's vision blurred as a deafening ringing filled her ears, her mind violently rejecting the auditory processing of what Elena had just proclaimed. The meticulously constructed walls of her emotional defense system, built over months of agonizing grief therapy and quiet suffering, instantly vaporized, leaving her completely exposed to a tidal wave of paralyzing, suffocating panic. Driven by a primal, uncontrollable maternal instinct, Sally found herself moving toward Elena, her trembling hands reaching out as her eyes locked onto the infant's face. As she peered down at the sleeping child, the breath was violently stolen from her lungs. The baby did not possess a single trace of Elena's features. Instead, the child bore the unmistakable, dominant genetic markers of the Newman bloodline, coupled with delicate facial structures that mirrored Sally's own reflection. The horrifying, impossible truth began to dawn on her with the chilling clarity of a nightmare from which she could not wake. This was not a child conceived in some secret, forgotten tryst between Adam and Elena. This was her flesh and blood. This was the daughter she had been told was dead, the child she had wept over, now living, breathing, and completely oblivious to the monumental tragedy surrounding her existence. As the visceral shock of the child's identity paralyzed her body, Sally's hyperactive mind began to frantically piece together the labyrinthine puzzle of the past year, connecting the most sinister dots imaginable. The sudden, aggressive campaign by Victor Newman to reclaim Newman Media, the intense pressure she faced to surrender the company, and Adam's inexplicably urgent, secret negotiations to buy her out, it all coalesced into a horrifying portrait of absolute depravity. Victor Newman, the ruthless patriarch who viewed human lives as mere pieces on a grand corporate chessboard, had orchestrated the ultimate manipulation. He had somehow discovered or facilitated the concealment of Ava's survival, using the infant's life as an invisible, demonic leverage to manipulate the board, control Adam, and force Sally into complete submission without her ever knowing the true stakes of the game. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of Victor's masterstroke was beyond human comprehension. He had allowed a grieving mother to mourn an empty grave, watching her psychological deterioration with cold, calculating indifference, all to secure the assets of a media conglomerate. Sally realized with sickening clarity that her grief had been weaponized, her maternal devastation engineered to ensure she was too weak, too broken to fight back against the Newman machine. The realization that she had surrendered her company, her life's work, to the very monsters who had stolen her living child and replaced her with a ghost was a psychological violation so profound that it threatened to permanently fracture her sanity. But the most devastating blow, the realization that completely annihilated whatever remained of Sally's soul, was the undeniable complicity of Adam Newman, the man she had loved, the man she had grieved with, the man she believed shared the eternal scar of losing their daughter, must have known the truth. The secret payout, the desperate plea for her to walk away from Newman Media to avoid Victor's wrath, it was not an act of protection, but a transaction of silence. Adam had traded the truth of their living daughter for a seat at his father's table and the keys to a corporate empire. He had looked into Sally's tear-filled eyes, knowing their child was breathing in a hidden location, and chose power over his own flesh and blood. The betrayal was so absolute, so fundamentally evil, that it stripped away Sally's ability to comprehend reality. The psychological annihilation instantly manifested into a severe, terrifying physical crisis. The massive surge of adrenaline, cortisol, and sheer terror coursing through Sally's veins triggered a violent physiological reaction. A sudden, agonizing cramp ripped through her lower abdomen, so intense that it forced a breathless gasp from her lips. She doubled over, her hands clutching her stomach in a desperate, protective embrace as the horrifying realization set in. The extreme, unprecedented stress of discovering her first child had been stolen by the Newmans was now directly threatening the life of the child currently growing inside her. The trauma of the past was actively destroying the fragile promise of her future, creating a catastrophic biological feedback loop of panic and pain. In her most desperate hour, as she collapsed to the polished marble floor of the ballroom, Sally was completely and utterly alone. Billy Abbott, the father of the child she was currently fighting to protect, was miles away, entirely consumed by his own bitter war against Cain Ashby and his manic quest to unravel the secrets of Jill Abbott's past. His absence was a glaring, painful reminder of her isolation in a city governed by ruthless dynasties. There was no one to catch her as she fell, no one to shield her from the flashing cameras of the paparazzi who were eagerly documenting the tragic public destruction of the Spectre Charles CEO. The glittering launch event had transformed into a grotesque theater of cruelty, with Sally cast as the ultimate tragic victim of Newman ambition. The chaotic blur of the emergency response felt like a distorted, terrifying echo of her past nightmare. The wailing sirens of the ambulance, the harsh, sterile, fluorescent lights of the emergency room, the frantic, clinical shouts of the medical staff rushing her through the swinging doors of Genoa City Memorial Hospital. It was a horrifying repetition of the day she thought she lost Ava. But this time, the stakes were infinitely more complex and devastating. Lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to a terrifying array of fetal monitors and intravenous lines, Sally was trapped in a psychological prison of unimaginable torment. She was simultaneously mourning the years stolen from the daughter she now knew was alive, while fighting with every ounce of her failing physical strength to prevent a second fatal miscarriage. The rhythmic, frantic beeping of the fetal heart monitor echoed through the cold hospital room, serving as a cruel countdown to a potential second tragedy. The doctors moved with urgent precision, their faces masked with grim concern as they attempted to stabilize the severe contractions threatening to end the pregnancy prematurely. Sally stared blankly at the ceiling, her body trembling violently as tears carved silent, agonizing paths down her pale cheeks. Her mind was entirely shattered, torn between the desperate need to rise from that bed and tear through the Newman empire to reclaim her stolen daughter, and the paralyzing fear that any sudden movement, any spike in her heart rate, would kill the innocent life currently depending on her for survival. As the medical team frantically adjusted her medications, the harsh reality of her situation settled over her like a suffocating shroud. She was a hostage to her own biology, trapped in a hospital bed by the very enemies who had orchestrated her destruction. The monitor beside her bed suddenly emitted a sharp, sustained alarm, indicating a dangerous drop in the fetal heart rate, sending the room into a state of absolute chaos. Amidst the terrifying flurry of medical intervention, Sally's tear-filled eyes caught a subtle movement at the edge of her vision. A tall, imposing shadow slowly materialized in the doorway of her hospital room, blocking the light from the hallway. Was it Adam arriving to confess to the ultimate betrayal, or was it Victor Newman himself stepping out of the darkness to ensure that the mother of his secret granddaughter would never have the chance to expose the most demonic conspiracy in the history of Genoa City?